Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. The plan for this week is the following one. Today, we will finish the Compas case, having a closer look to the data sources used by the Compas algorithm. And then we will have an overview on a complementary approach to fairness, to quantitative computations of fairness, which is the fairness qualitative assessment. Tomorrow we will have the first session of exercises that will be devoted mostly to explanations of discrimination issues. We will solve one past exam together, and then I will give you at least two formal exams as exercises to solve by yourself, but I will explain you in details tomorrow. So this is the plan of the week. And from now on, we will have only theory in the Mondays and exercises, 3 hours exercises every Tuesday. So this won't change until the end of the course. Okay, let me resume last part of the Compas case from a couple of considerations. The first one is that the Compas case had performances that were the Compas algorithm, had performances that were comparable to those of human judgment. So there was a study. Here you can find the link if you want, for your own curiosity, to delve into details. The study showed that regarding both accuracy and both in terms of false positives and false negatives, the performances of human judgment were, in terms of accuracy, basically the same, even slightly better than the Compas algorithm, both for black defendant, as you can see, the black bars, and for white defendants. And this is something that should be taken into account when automating a decision process. There should be all comparison results after the system is either tested or deployed for a while should be always compared back to the results obtained by the human process to understand what are the benefits, the actual benefits, and what should be improved in the automated process. Regarding the false positive, the human judgment quite outperformed the Compas. The Compas case, the Compas case slightly outperformed the human judgment for black defendants, and vice versa. There was a slight improvement on white cases from the human judgment, as you can see. Finally, as far as false negatives are concerned, for white, the Compas case was about 10% better. The Compas algorithm, sorry, keeping saying a Compas case, was the same level for black defendants, the black bars. So not a great achievement in terms of performances. Then, ways of automation. As you can, as I already said, there are documents that reveal the variables used by the Compas case, by the Compas algorithm. However, the actual algorithm that was used is a black box. It was not is not public. However, it was studied whether a logistic regression, a very simple logistic regression, using all the 137 features, was performing better than simple algorithms that are case A, a logistic regression LR with only 7 features, a logistic regression LR again with only 2 features, support vector machines with 7 features, nonlinear support vector machine, and then the last term of comparison is the Compas case. Why doing such an experiment? Because we have, especially in Europe, less in the United States, but we have quite universally agreed, at least in terms of good practices, on data minimization. You should collect only the data that is strictly necessary for your prediction goals. 137 features are a lot, especially when features are very sensitive data, as we will see in a while. So the goal of this study was to understand whether the data minimization principle was used in Compas and what were the performances achievable by much simpler models. Let's have a look only at the first row, accuracy overall. The overall accuracy reached by a linear regression with only 7 features instead of 137, case D, is the same, basically. 66% with a confidence interval of 95%, around 64 and 68. And with using the same variables as Compas, 65%. Again, this is not, I want to stress because it's important to understand, I want to stress the fact that this is not the real Compas algorithm. It was built a logistic regression using all the features used in the Compas algorithm. So important to understand this difference. A logistic regression with only 2 features reached, again, the same accuracy level, 66%. Slightly lower, but same range, the nonlinear support vector machine. When accuracy was segmented, analyzed in subgroups, black and white, the findings are very similar. As you can see, 66% again and 66% for the logistic regression with 7 features, same level with 2 features. And about Compas, we have again similar values with only accuracy for white that is slightly higher, 67%, and slightly lower than previously for black people. If we look at the false positive, third and fourth row, for black, again, we have the best accuracy, the best, the percentage, the highest percentage was 45%, logistic regression with 2 features, but is not so far away from the 44.8% of Compas. This is for percentage of false positive for black. The best result was reached with support vector machine. Also in terms of false positive for white, 20%. Regarding the false negative, the support vector machine performed worst, Compas 28%, and simpler logistic regression reached a minimum of 21%. For white, we had higher percentages of false negatives, and this is in line with the problem of Compas, where false negatives were higher for white. This is an advantage because you are not predicted as a high risk while you are a recidivist. 47% for Compas, and that is the same basically as for the other logistic regression, a bit better than support vector machine. Of course, I will never ask you about the percentages, but the takeaway is that you could achieve similar results or even better using much less data. And why using much less data? We will have now a closer look to the data sources of Compas to understand why it is important from the point of view of at least of human dignity, to use less data. Yes, please. Yes.
There is an overlap in the confidence intervals of basically everything. So it's all statistics. If I had to write a paper on this, I would say that all the models do not statistically significantly differ from one another. So legally, instead, if you can take the mean average of the accuracy and say, oh, this is better than that, but the 95% intervals are the same.
Are not always overlapping, but mostly yes, they are. And this confirms yes, this observation is right, thank you. And this confirms that you could use a more simple model using less data about individual. So yes, you're right. I cannot say that from the legal point of view, you can take the average value about all the results.
What of the two was more legally significant? If the confidence interval or the mean value?
From the legal point of view, I cannot really answer because, first of all, from a point of view of competencies, you know that I'm not a legal scholar. Anyway, we don't have, but I can tell you for sure that there are no legal requirements that are quantitatively specified. Equity, fairness are concepts that are not that are much more than a computation, that are an equivalence of false positives. Having a way to compute fairness is a good point, is a good start at least, but it's not sufficient as a criterion. The problem is much more complex. So from the legal point of view, we cannot say that we can take the average. Of course, we can say that the data minimization principle was not followed. And why it should be important to use such a principle. Let me share another document now that you should already have in the material. Oops. Okay. This is an example of a risk assessment that is filled partially by the defendant and partially is pre-filled or filled by a police. And this is the source data used by the Compas algorithm. We have very personal information which serve to for identification purposes. We have track of the gender. We have track of marital status, so that these are protected attributes. Then we have several sections. I will now have an overview on the several sections, and then we will have a closer look to the questions on each section. So first of all, a descriptive section on the current charges. So why the defendant is, what is the crime for which the defendant has to go under judgment. Then a look into the history of the defendant. What is the criminal history of the defendant? And you have several questions. Then you have several other questions that regards what is the social context of the defendant. And the criminal history also is connected to this. So family criminality, this is a section. Peers, criminality among the peers, friends, for instance. Then we have a section on abuse of substances. Residence, stability of life, for example, job. social environment, education, work, vocation, use of free time, leisure, recreation, proxies of social isolation, criminal personality, so questions from the psychological point of view. Well, this is a subset as it related to the psychological emotions, so related to the psychology of the individual, criminal attitude as well. And so this is the end of 137, the features used. So imagine that you have for each person, such a sheet that is updated every time a person is stopped and is under judgment. Such a sheet is updated. Partially is filled by the person who is under judgment, partially is profiled by police, because let's have a look to the current charges. This is a description of why the person is under judgment. The current charges is assault with weapons. As you can see, both options are ticked, plus other minor charges. And then a description of the crime. Do any current offenses involve family violence? Yes or not? Which category of the followings apply to the current charge? Misdemeanor, non-violent felony, or violent felony. So it's a violent crime, but not involving family. Violent crime with weapons, this is assault. Was this person on probation or parole at the time of the current office? So whether this person was already benefiting of an alternative sanction. In this case was probation, could be parole, probation, both or neither. Is this person a suspected or admitted gang member? Yes or no? And in this case, yes. Number of pending charges. So how many other charges are pending on the individual? In this case, none. And is this the current of charge felony, property, or fraud? In this case, no. So these are descriptions of the crime. And this is turned into a variable, into a feature. Then we make a step towards more personal aspects. How many times has this person been arrested before? This is profiled, 5. 5 more times was in the database for arrest. How many prior juvenile felony offenses arrest? 3. So 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5 were juvenile crimes, and more than 2 were violent. So these are additional data on the historical crime. Then let's go. Let's move beyond to other more interesting questions. We now move to the family criminality. So we move to the family sphere, individual sphere of the person. So which of the following best describes who principally raised you? So here it is the person who is filling the questionnaire. Both natural parents, natural mother only, natural father only, relatives, adoptive parents, foster parents, other arrangement. The fact that the way you were raised might have an impact on your criminality is an aspect that is important for judges to understand the causes that brought the person to a crime, to make a crime. Vulnerability, for instance, past history, difficult family history. So there are all elements that are important for the judge to understand what are the base causes, the vulnerabilities at the base of the life of an individual. But this is very different from taking this information, turn it into a variable, and make a prediction with this and other informations. Because if this aspect is statistical, will be a statistical significant predictor, it means that an individual with this kind of personal characteristics, for instance, raised by adoptive parents, let's say that this level of the variable will be significant. But it also means that whenever you are these characteristics, you are raised by adoptive parents, you are somehow more probable to receive a high risk. It is very different to use this information to understand what are the causes behind a crime or the attitude of criminality, and extracting patterns and using these statistical patterns to make individual predictions. Because, as we have seen in the anecdote and example of the old lady and the lawyer, you might end up in errors, or you might end up more generally in making discriminations just because of personal characteristics of your own life. Just because I was raised by adoptive parents, I have more probability to receive a high risk. You see, there is a huge difference when you turn information that should be used in a qualitative way into a rough statistical pattern. Then let's go ahead. There are no questions on this important difference. See no question, okay. Then, if you lived with both parents and then later separated, how old were you at the time? Less than 5, 5 to 10, 11 to 14, 15 or older? Same considerations. Why is this information should be turned to make an individual prediction? It's important to understand the whole social environment in which a person raised, in which she could encounter difficulties in life, but can be easily become an automatic discrimination if one of these levels will be an important factor for the prediction. Was your father ever arrested? Yes or no? Was your mother ever arrested? Yes or no? Were your brothers or sister ever arrested? Yes or no? About same questions on your wife, husband, parent. Did a parent or parent figure who raised you ever have a drug or alcohol problem? Was one of your parents ever sent to jail or prison? Yes or no? Then, similar questions to your peers. How many of your friends, acquaintances have ever been arrested? Half, most, few, none. About whether they serve time in jail or prison, whether they are gang members, whether they take illegal drugs regularly, whether the person you have ever been a gang member, and if you are now a gang member. 2 comments on this kind of questions. First one, we are under a legal context in which you are required to tell the truth. Any legal context requires that you tell the truth, but US legal settings as well as UK legal settings place an important relevance on this aspect. If anybody of you took a flight towards the United States in order to get permission to enter, you need to declare that you are not a terrorist. So this might seem strange to a different, coming from a different context. But this answering to this to that question, first of all, is mandatory. Secondly, is important because in that legal context, you are taking responsibility towards that assertion. So if you are, extreme case, if you are a terrorist and you declare that you are not, then your charge will be much, much higher. The same in lower context, but that follow the same principles. As a student in any English university or United States university, you must follow an ethical code of conduct. And if you are caught in, let's say, don't say copying, but infringing the ethical code of conduct, you are out of the university. Even cases of copying at exams, on breaking the rules of the exams. We know that different social contexts and different legal contexts make the ethical rule of conduct less relevant. How many of you read carefully the Polytechnico Code of Conduct for students? So you see the difference between relevance puts to this kind of code of conduct, admittance of certain aspects like this. So you are a legal pressure in this kind of questionnaires to tell the truth. On the same time, if you don't feel this legal pressure, and if you know that this data might be used against you, for instance, to make a decision about staying in prison or not, or to make a decision about the severity of your crime, or to make a decision that takes into account your mental level, your sanity level, mental sanity level, then you might, for the Goodhart's law, you might be pushed to not to tell the truth here, because you self-filled all these questions. So you might say, I'm not a gang member, because you might suspect that this element would put more severity into your crime. Or you might have fear to say that you are a gang member, because once you're out of prison, your other gang members might make some actions on you because you declared that you are a member of a gang, etc., etc. So these observations have the goal to reflect on the reliability of this type of data. Could be high from one aspect and low from other points of view. Substance abuse. What are your usual habits in using alcohol or drugs? Do you have current legal problems because you used alcohol or drugs? Yes or no? Were you using alcohol when you were arrested? In this case, yes. And what about the drugs? Are you following treatment for alcohol or drugs, such as counseling, outpatient, inpatient, residential, etc.? Then residence and stability. How often do you have contact with your family? Daily, once per week, less than once, never, no family? But remember, this variable then this information then is turned into a variable. And if it is statistically significant, you are building a risk score based on even on this kind of information. How often have you moved in the last 12 months? Do you have a regular living situation? How long have you been living at your current address? Do you live with friends? Yes or no? Do you live alone? Etc. Then social environment. Is there much crime in your neighborhood? Yes or no? Do some of your friends or family feel they must carry a weapon to protect themselves in your neighborhood? And in your neighborhood, have some of your friends or family been crime victims? Do some of the people in your neighborhood feel they need to carry a weapon for protection? Is it easy to get drugs in your neighborhood? Are there gangs in your neighborhood? I read all of them because it is important to understand that either whether one of these variables, again, will be statistically significant for prediction, then the fact that you live in a certain neighborhood will determine high probability of getting a high risk. And this is a pure discrimination issue. Then you will get information on your past education, whether you completed high school, what was your final grade, your usual grades in high school, and etc. Whether you have a job, then aspects about work, whether you have a job, whether you currently have a skill to find a work, how many times have you been fired from a job, etc. How you use your free time. How often did you feel bored? Never, several times per month, several times per week, daily. How often did you feel you have nothing to do in your spare time, etc. Social isolation. And here, there are sentences in which you have to declare whether you agree or not, and plus intermediate levels. I have friends who help me when I have troubles. Agree, disagree. I feel lonely. I have friends who enjoy doing things with me, etc. Criminal personality, same type of questions. I am seen by others as cold and unfeeling. I always practice what I preach. I'm really good at talking my way out of problems, etc. Anger, specific anger. Some people see me as a violent person. I almost never lose my temper. If people make me angry or lose my temper, I can be dangerous, etc. Same types of questions related to criminal attitude. As a hungry person has a right to steal. When people get into trouble with law, it's because they have no chance to get a decent job. So I might agree with this sentence. And I think that has nothing to do with a criminal attitude. But this is typical sentences used by psychologists to understand what are your potentialities as a criminal, and so on. So I wanted to spend some time with you to read these questions, and then I strongly encourage you to have a look at the document to understand what were the features used, and to let you reflect on the aspects that I mentioned. Non-minimization of data collection, data that was collected for a purpose and then used for another purpose, data that was collected for understanding the person and the case, because this is the work of the judge. The judge is not only asked to apply the law, but is asked to apply the law given the circumstances of the crime. And these variables are then turned into, this information is then turned into variables. We have seen that there are reliability issues. And last but not least, you get discrimination issues because statistical patterns may inform a prediction based on personal characteristics. Okay. let's close the Compas case just with a summary of the issues. We're using a schema that is that you can find here, where one of each of these aspects are explained. First of all, intervention versus prediction. Even if you have a high, you can get a high accuracy or predictions, and this was not the case in Compas, at least for certain subgroups, you are not solving the problem of recidivism. You are just predicting the probability of being rearrested. And this is linked with the second aspect, target construct mismatch. You have a construct, and this is a measurement bias. You don't on the target variable, because you are not really measuring recidivism. You are measuring the probability of being rearrested. That is different from recidivism. We might have in Compas had distribution shift, that is evaluation bias, because of using data from a specific range of time, and then keep using the model for a while, and also for geographical differences in the criminality. We have seen that Compas was really comparable to linear models. The performances were comparable to linear models with only 2 features or with 7 features. We have seen that there was a lack of independence and separation. The model was calibrated, but did not satisfy independent separation. Then the subjects could not challenge and contest the information and even the decision. They were not aware even of a risk score on them. And then, good at raw, what I was just mentioning earlier, you might, as a defendant, be pushed to change your answers to the questions because of several factors. Because you don't want to be in troubles after you are out of jail, because you would like to change to influence the decision of the judge, etc., etc. You could never know what is in the mind of a person under judgment when answering such personal questions. So you might lie on your personal history in a way or in the other in order to influence the judge. Okay. As I said on last Tuesday, evaluation of fairness. Yes, please.
One could just rely on their criminal attitude. I didn't really understand how did they handle it.
Okay, thanks for the question. Let me make a step behind. So I repeat the questions so that it will be recorded. The question was how Compas, well, the company that developed Compas could handle the issue of reliability of answers, whether a person could lie or not. First of all, I was probably not clear in the premises. The data that you have seen is not data that comes from the company that developed Compas. This is the data that every defendant has to fill in a given district in the US. When you are arrested, stopped by police, and you are now the judgment start, you have, first of all, to fill a questionnaire. Part of the questionnaire is filled directly by the police employees because it's historical data on your criminal history, how many prior offenses. Then you as a defendant have to fill the questionnaire. There is no way to access whether you are lying or not. Police might collect all criminal or criminal records like this that you filled and check the consistency. But we don't know, at least there is no evidence that this is performed. Equivant, that is the company that produced Compas, so have no way to assess the reliability of the answers and the reliability of the source data, because this is data coming from the police department. So this aspect was not taken at all into account. Did I answer? Okay. Please.
I think there was a misunderstanding of the actual legal law, but it's not.
Can you speak loudly, because I couldn't hear the...
I think there is a misunderstanding of what is the good arts law. Not a legal law, just a social law.
Okay, let me explain better why it is called law. It is both an empirical law and a law from the point of view of sociology, even anthropology, because about the human behavior. It's not so I use the term law because in these disciplines is called a law, an empirical law. It means that you have data, you have observations that are both in quantity and in quality enough to take this phenomenon as real, to consider it as a kind of a law. It's not a physical law, not a legal law, but it is a pattern that was observed, was explained so many times that can be considered as an empirical law. Because, again, observations were extended, were quite extensive. Case studies, quantitative studies, etc. And so, in these terms, is called a law, not because is in our legal is a validity of legal law. Did I answer or not? If I did not answer, I can try to be more precise. Was not your question.
The point of my...
What was the point of your question?
We don't all know what is the good arts law.
Yes, I spent quite a lot of time on the good arts law, on the reflexivity problem. The good arts law I also call the Cobras effect. Some of you were present in the lecture about the measurement issues, measurement process. You will find in the slides. Yeah. Okay. But it was a good occasion to specify the term law. Thanks. We have seen, just to close this, the parenthesis on this question, we see the reflexivity problem, Campbell's law. Whenever an indicator is used for an evaluation of a person, of a group of persons, will be subject to social pressure. Social corruption is also called in technical terms. You try to change your behavior in order to optimize that indicator that will be used against you. And I made you several examples. The good arts law is a relative of the Campbell's law or reflexivity problem. Whenever your measure becomes a target, then it ceases to be a good measure because of the phenomena that I showed you. And I also told you the anecdote about the Cobra effect, about the British government in India that took action to try to reduce the number of cobras with the opposite result. The other part of today's lecture will be devoted to a different, slightly different way to assess the fairness of an algorithm system. It's called fairness qualitative assessment. It's a very, very simple way that is made of 4 questions. It should be considered as a very first step in the assessment, a risk assessment or impact assessment, depending on whether you use it before system deployment or after system deployment. And this is an example of using a mix of ethical approaches to the assessment of fairness. With, if you remember, when I showed you criteria for fairness evaluation, quantitative criteria for fairness evaluation, I told you that these criteria are this approach that you compute statistical computations of fairness are below the umbrella of consequentialism. This was one of the 3 main approaches for normative ethics. At the very beginning of this course, or the second part of the course, I told you that we are approaching data ethics from the point of view of normative ethics. Normative ethics had 3 main sub-approaches. Consequentialism, you focus on the consequences of a given action, so a given algorithm. And we have seen you can do it statistically with the fairness criteria. And then virtue ethics, that is, you start from the values, the virtues, from the development or desired shared values that are then translated into mechanism, in this case, into algorithms. The third was deontologism. You end up with a set of rules, code of conduct for professionists in the realm of software development. We will deal with the deontologism probably at the very last theory lecture. Today, this is an example of how to mix a bit of consequentialism with virtue ethics. And it is, and we'll do it with the fairness qualitative assessment. As I said, it is in the middle between algorithm risk assessment or algorithm impact evaluation. The difference is that you make a risk assessment before you deploy your system in design phase. You make an impact evaluation usually after, or when your system is under testing or under deployment. You can do both. You can use the FQA in both cases. The goal is to identify issues of fairness, as I said, in both a design phase, during, after deployment. Everybody can use it, both who is developing the system or external auditors or observers of a given system. The questions are 4. Are the following one, and with an example, we will run an example through the 4 questions to understand how the assessment can be done. First of all, what social conflicts arise when you design and operate a system? And among the social conflicts, which stakeholders are adversely affected by this conflict? Who is winning, who is losing, who is concerned, and how, why? What values, social interests are at stake in these implications for stakeholders? And how you could mitigate, if not solve at all, these conflicts of interest. So these 4 questions. We use as a running example SafeRouter. SafeRouter is probably still used, but not sure. an app, basically a service, digital service, that was designed with data from criminal records of the city of Edinburgh, building a recommendation for urban itineraries, in order to minimize the probability to incur into a crime. As you can see here in the map, there are areas of the city that are red, others that are yellow, others that are green, others that are not filled at all. And this can be seen as either as a heat map of the probability of the level of danger of a given area, or similarly, because the two things are connected, the number of past crimes in a given area that instructed the algorithm that draw this map of danger in a given area. So if you want to go, it means that if a person using this app says that wants to go from A to B, that is here, B is here, A is here, the algorithm will probably try to minimize the number of times you have to go through a red area. So can suggest something like this, if you can also, how to say, if you put some constraints on time. So not probably something like this, because it takes too much. But if you want a safe route, you use this recommendation algorithm that is built on top of historical crime data. Is it clear? Now we apply the 4 questions on this algorithm. What social conflicts arise from the design and the operation of such a system? We use a table that is well known by you again. This Taylor-Russell diagram, but is also a confusion matrix. You have on the top the predictions that can be negative or positive, and you have an event, can be positive or negative, present or absent, and you have the errors on these cells. Whenever you have negative predictions but the positive event, you have a false negative, vice versa, you have a false positive. This should be something super clear to you. In this case, we can say that the prediction is low risk of assault or high risk of assault. And the event is, and this is difficult to compute, this is an intrinsic limitation of such kind of social outcome prediction. That is, there was a crime or not, or there were the circumstances for a crime or not, or there was no assault. It is very difficult to build even such a simple table with this kind of app, because how can you know whether there would have been a crime if you passed through that area? Or you can simply track whether a crime was actually happened in a given range of time, let's say in a week, a month, in that particular area. So there is some practical difficulties in tracking whether the event occurred or not. But let's assume that we can use a reasonable proxy. And so whenever you have a low risk of assault as a prediction, and instead you had a crime happening, that is that a dangerous area or circumstance was misclassified as safe. This is an error. The other error is whenever you have a high risk of assault predictor, but nothing happened. So you made a longer route, but was not necessary. So safe areas misclassified as dangerous. And then the complementary cells are whenever there was a high risk of assault and actually there could have been the circumstances for a crime, so danger avoided, or no assault, low risk of assault, okay, everything is clear, is correct, safe area that is correctly labeled. And the social conflicts arise in occurrence of the errors. So you have to, this methodology, simple methodology, ask you to fill the table in terms of what happens, what are the implications, high-level implications. And then the following questions make you start from this identification of the errors, not in numerical terms, but in terms of what is the error about, what are the implications. We may detail more what are the implications. And then let us go through in details on what is the impact of the risk of making these errors. So first of all, you have to identify who are the stakeholders that are impacted in a negative way by these conflicts. Stakeholders can be direct, those are the people who directly use the application, or indirect, the person who are not using the application but might be involved as well. In the case of Safer Route, the direct stakeholders are the users of the app. They might be, we can reason about this, but I think that we might, it could be reasonable to say that people who have a deep knowledge of a city, of a certain urban area, do not need at all this kind of app. This app could be extremely useful for tourists, people who is new in the city or in a given neighborhood, new residents, etc. Women may use more often this app because they might, because of their higher physical vulnerability, they might need, or they might feel they need the usage of this app. Well, as a direct stakeholders, there are always the investor or the owners of the app, but we made them implicit, and basically we don't take them into account. There are also indirect stakeholders that are residents that are living in the city, or at least in the areas that are ranked as dangerous or not by the app. Also commercial activities that are located in those areas. We identify them as indirect stakeholders. And this is needed in order to answer the question, which stakeholders are adversely affected and how. If we look back to the table that was filled earlier, we can say that false positive may impact mostly the business owners, the owners of the business located in the areas that were classified wrongly as dangerous, because they might have less people going through those areas, is a massive usage of the app is in place. Or the residents, again, if many people use the app, your property might, there might be a bad reputation about a certain neighborhood, and your property might lose economic value in these terms. So this is the way they might be impacted or not. Please notice that if you do this analysis at design phase, you can try to counteract these negative impacts. But if you do this analysis only after deployment, then you need to wait at least a few years to have data, reliable data, and to check whether you are actually making this kind of impact on commercial activities and on residents. Is a well-known aspect in software engineering is that you have to devote enough time to the requirements phase, because a change in the requirements documents and the design document costs much, much less than a change during after deployment. If you need to change a functionality only in the design, it's just a matter of a few hours. But if you need to change the code, then good luck if the system is already running. Or at least it costs much, much more. You need to change the code, you need to run regression testing, run again integration testing, problems may arise, and so on. Even in economical terms, it's better to analyze things risk at design phase. Then let's move to the false negative. Here, the stakeholders that are mostly affected by false negatives are the users of the app, because you might go through an area because recommended by the algorithm that is indeed dangerous, even if there are no criminal, not enough criminal records, but indeed it is dangerous. Well, consider that, let's not consider only violent crimes. Let's consider also when your bike gets stolen. How many times you go to police to declare that your bike has been stolen? How many times this time of crime is reported? Not a lot of times, not at all, most of the time. So this type of crime has a type of bias, of course, in the data collection. And if the crime is stealing a bike, you might go in an area recommended by the algorithm in which many bikes for some reason are stolen, and your bike is also stolen. So this is a false negative, and you receive a loss, a damage, because you follow the recommendation algorithm, and otherwise you would not pass through that area. So the different stakeholders, you can see that are affected differently by different type of errors. There are false positives that affect, at least in this very simple analysis, mostly commercial activities and people living in the neighborhoods, while false negative affect mostly the people who are using the app. And then we could go, as I did in this example, we go more in details and make these considerations for all types of crimes, because violent crimes are much, much different from non-violent crimes, etc. Having identified the way stakeholders are impacted by poor performances of the system, basically, or types of error of the systems, it's very difficult that a system that predicts social outcomes will be able to have 0% of errors in false positive and false negatives. Is impossible. So you will always have some kind of impact. But what are the social interests, so the values that are at stake for these stakeholders in these cases? So we need to speak about values. What are values? The principles or standards of a person or society, the personal or societal judgment of what is valuable and important in life, can be or not related to ethics and morality. And what's the priority of values that you put in values is what usually identify what you are or what you want to be. What are the principles that a society follows? If you take the US Constitution, at the very beginning, there are certain values that are declared. Internal safety of the country, the value of happiness for every person has the right to pursue happiness in his life, his or her life. These are examples of values But at the very beginning then of a constitution, then you get from values, you have laws. Italian constitution as well has some principles that are values, shared values, at least on the paper. And from those values, the laws then follow. So the values can apply to your individual life as a person, to groups of people, or even at institutional level. When we speak about discrimination, usually we are principally mostly interested in human welfare, so opportunities denied given by automation, or justice. Can be attributive, distributive, how you allocate resources, for instance, social justice, this case, but not exclusively. This is just a note because most of the problems of data ethics that we are seeing are problems of discrimination. It is impossible to avoid conflicts about values. There are always conflicts or values, should be managed. A very short parenthesis that is left to your own curiosity. So this is not part content of the final that can be asked in the final exam. Have you ever heard, or have you ever played with the moral machine? How many of you? Can you raise your hand? Okay, I thought many more. So this is a philosophical dilemma. It's been turned into an experiment by scientists of the MIT, in which you can, if you connect to this URL, you can make the test. You will be asked to decide on 13 scenarios in which you have an autonomous vehicle that is in such a situation in which you can only decide whether the vehicle should go straight, so take no action and kill either some people on the street or the people inside the car, or take an action. And in order to avoid this child, you take action. So the car that is autonomous should decide to make a turn, and the result, the consequence, will be killing a woman, an old lady. So you will be asked 13 times questions that on this kind of choices. The questions are randomized, so every time you connect, you get different questions. And this is a very informative exercise because you will realize how values can easily inform design requirements, software design requirements. For instance, it was found that in Western societies, most people that took this kind of test made a privilege with respect to the youngest people. So try to avoid killing a child. So saving the child and killing the old lady. In Eastern society like China, Japan, India, was the reverse. Usually people taking the test saved the old lady and killed the young baby or younger persons. This is because it's a different types of society that is built around the value of different values of greater relevance to old people. High social value of old people. This was just an example of different cultural aspects and different values that shape differently the culture, the norms, the law in terms of legal laws of societies. Hypothetically, a car that is able to recognize such kind of situations, whether there is hypothetically, whether there is an old lady or a baby, should be designed according to some kind of values, sparing the old or sparing the baby. So I leave to your own curiosity, and or otherwise, given the very few took, if there will be some spare time and some lecture or exercise, we might even make a collective exercise experiment and making the test all together. But for now, it's left to you. And you will find that in the slides, some results about the values, the different values according to different types of cultures. I was saying countries with more individualistic cultures are more likely to spare the young, to spare more lives instead of less lives, etc. Now let's go back to values. There are infinite list of values, and this philosopher Schwartz categorized the values in 4 macro categories. Openness to change is you give importance to self-direct your own life, to get stimuli on your life, to make fun in your life, hedonism, self-enhancement, achievement. You want to be better, to build your own skills, power. You want to get power, political power, economical power. You want to achieve that. Conservation, you feel more, you value more security in your life, or you value a lot of tradition, conformity to a given set of rules, norms. And then self-transcendence, attention of the new generations to the problems of the climate change are more towards this quadrant: universalism, benevolence for the earth, for not disrupting the environment. Older generations after the Second World War were more on this, were valuing more this aspect. So going up and up in the social hierarchy. So these are just examples of values, and you can find other definitions of more specific values. Autonomy refers to people's ability to decide, plan, and act in ways that they believe will help them to achieve their own goals. Even universal usability refers to making all people successful users of information technology. This is a very specific value, can be translated into technical requirements. So, leaving the definitions for further readings for you, we can have values that are specifically supported by the software designers. A startup, for instance, in Torino here, is working in the field of news, collection of news from several newspapers, and then presenting to you the most relevant news, so that you don't have to pay yearly subscriptions to all newspapers, but you only pay a general subscription to category of sport, for instance. An explicit value that was supported and translated into design requirements by this startup was to put a limit in the number of recommendations in order to limit the time that you spend on your phone. This is an example of value that you can pursue and with a software and translate directly into software requirement. As an individual designer, you might also embed some value in your design. You want a website that is particularly well looking, and so this is a value for you that is nice looking, and you can translate it into technical requirements. And then we might have values of the stakeholders that might be elicited from stakeholders and then translate into software requirements. All this had to be said because in our case, whenever we have the false negatives, we are impacting economic security and reputational value, reputational capital, let's say, of residents, of commercial activities, people owning those commercial activities. So these are the interests or values that are impacted when you are negatively impacting this type of stakeholders in this particular case. Or in the other case, for the false positives, for the false negatives, sorry, you are impacting the personal safety. This is a value, as we said, of the particular stakeholders that we identified, residents, tourists, women, etc. How you balance these values at stakes, these interests at stake? How you can mitigate them? Oh, you have different ways. First of all, you can try to understand what the people want, because this is an app that is for the people. It's used to increase the security of the people as a first goal. And then there are different ways of understanding what matters more for a given social group, for a given population. Citizen jury, citizen assembly. Jury is when you vote. You ask selected people from different social groups, select representatives from different social groups to express their own interest. You might make conferences with citizens. You might make a polling, a questionnaire. You might so-called make consensus conferences, a series of conferences. When you describe the problem, you describe several perspectives, and the people then discuss. The whole citizenship, the whole population can, at least potentially, can intervene. These are all examples how you can ask people about this kind of aspects. This is not new when you make the business plan. In that case, you try to understand what is the profitability of your software. Here, you try to understand what are the different, what are the values that are most important for your target audience. Or you might go through for a more technical solution. You might say, okay, I start running the software, but I enable error reports for the people, so the people can start putting their feedback directly on the app, and so that I can understand what's going on, what is their feedback, how they're using the app, and trying during operation to retune the application and try to solve, to mitigate the social tensions. For instance, I have a lot of complaints from people that get continuously bikes stolen through the way, and I can consider to retailor my application. Or I can prioritize based on values. I say, no, this app was built for the purpose of increase safety, and I will try to maximize safety. So not taking into account the false negative, even if they are 80%, I don't care. So this is an approach. Or you might say, no, I want to preserve the economical aspects, economical value of properties, of commercial activities. And so I can calibrate even technically optimize my classification system towards this goal. So these are just examples of actions that can be taken to mitigate or solve the value tensions that can arise from the execution of your system. As you can see, this puts a different light on the issue of fairness. That is not only a matter of equilibrium, of parity between false positive, probability of being predicted, etc. Its classifications and predictions of social outcomes impact more deeper aspects that need a more qualitative reflections, considerations, and then actions if you take actions only on the base of statistical computations, so you will be in troubles. Also because, as I already said, you can optimize for one criterion of fairness, but not for the others. So you need to understand. You need to use complementary tools and complementary points of view. This is a very simple example of running a qualitative analysis for fairness. Okay, this is all for today, and tomorrow we will have the first round of exercises.